A lawyer disappeared during a big case in 1998, leaving everyone baffled. But 5 years later, three kids stumble upon something, and what they find sends shockwaves through the entire town. The faint October light filtered through the curtains as Samantha Richardson's alarm clock beeped at 5:30 in the morning. She silenced it with practiced precision, careful not to disturb Michael, who mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. Samantha sat up slowly, her mind already shifting into the methodical focus she reserved for court days. The hardwood floor felt cold beneath her bare feet as she padded to the closet, where her dark green suit hung in a garment bag. She removed it carefully, running her fingers over the gold buttons that adorned the jacket. This suit had become something of a talisman over the years, her armor for the battles that mattered most. "Going with the lucky green today?" Michael Bennett's voice, still thick with sleep, came from the bed. He propped himself up on one elbow, his dark hair tousled against the white pillowcase. Samantha smiled as she laid the suit on the chair. "This isn't just any case, Mike. Today we start exposing United Chemical for what they really are, poisoners of children." Michael nodded, understanding the weight of her words. As an adjunct history professor at the University of Chicago, he'd watched Samantha build this case for 2 years, had seen the toll it took as she documented how United Chemical had illegally dumped toxic chemicals in Westlake, a working-class Chicago suburb, resulting in a childhood leukemia cluster that affected more than 60 children. 45 minutes later, Samantha stood before the bathroom mirror, adjusting her gold earrings. At 30, she had already accomplished what few believed possible, becoming the first light-skinned black woman to achieve partner status at the prestigious Goldstein and Partners law firm. Her reflection showed a woman prepared for battle. Determined brown eyes, hair pulled back in a sleek bun, the green suit fitting perfectly. "I might be late tonight," she said, brushing her lips against Michael's cheek. "Don't wait up." The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Samantha walked the 3 blocks to Intelligentsia Coffee. The barista greeted her with familiar warmth, already preparing her usual double Americano, no sugar. While waiting, Samantha reviewed her notes one last time, mentally rehearsing the arguments she would present to Judge Harrison Wells. By 8:30, Samantha strode through the revolving doors of the glass-walled skyscraper housing Goldstein and Partners in the Loop. Morning sunlight reflected off the building's exterior, casting prism-like patterns across the marble lobby floor. She nodded to the security guard and took the elevator to the 14th floor. Her assistant, Jenny Kaplan, was already at her desk, a stack of documents waiting. "Morning, Sam. I've organized the Westlake medical records by date of diagnosis. The most recent labs are on top." "Thanks, Jenny." Samantha accepted the files, momentarily pausing at a photo of a 7-year-old boy with a bright smile and no hair. Jacob Connors had been one of the first children diagnosed. He hadn't survived. The morning passed in a flurry of preparation. At 10:30, Samantha gathered her materials and headed to the federal courthouse on Dearborn Street. The security cameras recorded her arrival at 10:42, her green suit distinctive among the sea of navy and black. "Morning, Ray," she greeted the security guard, Raymond Cooper, with whom she'd exchanged pleasantries for years. "Big day today." "Good luck in there, Ms. Richardson," he replied, returning her ID badge after scanning it. Courtroom 507 had the solemn atmosphere Samantha had come to appreciate. The polished wood, the weight of law, and precedent hanging in the air. Judge Harrison Wells, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and reading glasses perched low on his nose, nodded as she entered. United Chemical's legal team, led by Thomas Granger, sat across the aisle. Granger, tall, thin, with a perpetual look of mild disdain, had been Samantha's opponent in environmental cases before. Today, however, he seemed unusually tense. "Your Honor," Samantha began once proceedings started, "we're requesting full access to United Chemical's internal documents regarding chemical disposal practices from 1989 through 1997. Our evidence suggests they were fully aware that their compounds were leaching into Westlake's groundwater." For the next 3 hours, Samantha methodically laid out her case, presenting preliminary evidence showing elevated toxin levels in soil samples and the statistical impossibility of so many childhood leukemia cases occurring naturally in such a small area. "This is a fishing expedition," Granger countered, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. When Samantha presented a leaked memo suggesting knowledge of contamination risks, Granger requested an urgent recess to consult with his clients. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Samantha stepped into the courthouse hallway and dialed Michael's number. "I need to stay late," she told him when he answered. Granger seems nervous, which is a good sign. "I think we're about to get access to the documents that will prove their negligence." "Knock 'em dead, counselor," Michael replied. "I'll save you some dinner." This was the last confirmed communication from Samantha Richardson. At 4:23, Jenny noticed that Samantha hadn't returned from her coffee break. Her Nokia cell phone remained on her desk, alongside a folder of notes. The Louis Vuitton bag Samantha never left behind was also there. She mentioned getting some documents from her car, another lawyer from the firm informed Jenny when asked. By 5:30, with Samantha still absent, Michael began calling her cell phone repeatedly. At 7:15, concerned by the lack of news, he arrived at the Goldstein and Partners offices. "This isn't like her," Michael insisted to Jenny as they walked to the underground parking garage. Samantha would never disappear in the middle of a case of this magnitude. Samantha's black Honda Accord was there, locked and empty. Her document briefcase was not in the vehicle. At 10:40, Detective James Morelli of the Chicago Police Department officially registered her disappearance. "We can't declare a 30-year-old missing after just a few hours," he explained with a procedural tone. "But given the unusual circumstances, we'll begin the search immediately." The next morning, the courthouse security team examined all recordings. Samantha was seen entering the parking garage at 3:47, but no camera captured her exit. The garage had 3 exits, but only 2 were monitored by cameras in 1998. "She could have voluntarily left through the east exit," suggested the head of security. "Impossible," Michael countered. "Samantha was about to expose one of the biggest companies in the country. She wouldn't just walk away." As police began their investigation, Michael called Elaine Richardson, Samantha's mother, who lived in Evanston and was battling advanced cancer. Upon hearing the news, Elaine fainted and had to be hospitalized. Later that evening, as Michael sat alone in Samantha's office, staring at her abandoned cell phone, he received an anonymous call on his own phone. A digitally altered voice spoke quickly. "If you want to find your fiancé, ask Judge Wells what happens to people who mess with United Chemical." Before Michael could respond, the caller hung up. When he tried to report this to the police, Michael discovered that Judge Wells had just requested temporary leave from the case due to urgent personal matters. Michael burst through the police station doors at 7 in the morning, his hair disheveled from a sleepless night. Detective Morelli looked up from his desk, coffee cup halfway to his lips, surprise registering on his weathered face. "I received an anonymous call last night," Michael said, leaning over Morelli's desk. "The caller mentioned Judge Wells and United Chemical, and now Wells has suddenly recused himself from the case. The timing can't be coincidental." Morelli set down his coffee with deliberate slowness. "Number blocked, duration of 17 seconds, he said, examining the call log Michael had pulled up on his phone. "We don't have much to work with here, Mr. Bennett." The detective's skepticism was evident as he explained that anonymous tips were common in high-profile cases, often leading nowhere. Nevertheless, he added the information to the growing file on Samantha's disappearance. By mid-morning, a team of investigators had assembled in a glass-walled conference room at Goldstein and Partners, interviewing staff members one by one. Michael watched through the partition, studying each colleague's face for signs of deception or hidden knowledge. Robert Goldstein, the 60-year-old senior partner, received Detective Morelli in his corner office with its panoramic view of Lake Michigan. The room's mahogany paneling and leather furnishings spoke of old money and established power. Samantha mentioned some strange calls in recent weeks, Goldstein admitted, adjusting his gold cufflinks. She dismissed them as intimidation tactics, standard practice in big corporate litigation, she said. Meanwhile, a police technician methodically examined Samantha's computer, scrolling through emails and browser history. No searches for flights, hotels, or unusual banking activity, he reported to Detective Rodriguez, Morelli's 35-year-old partner. Nothing to suggest she was planning to leave town. That afternoon, Michael drove to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The antiseptic smell hit him as he walked down the corridor to Elaine Richardson's room. At 58, Samantha's mother looked far older, her body ravaged by cancer treatments, her once vibrant skin now ashen. Michael took her thin hand in his, struggling to find the right words. As he explained Samantha's disappearance, silent tears traced paths down Elaine's hollow cheeks. "She called me Wednesday," Elaine whispered, her voice barely audible. "She mentioned threats, but said it was just part of the job. My baby girl was always so brave. Too brave sometimes." Later that evening, Morelli and Rodriguez conducted a thorough search of Samantha and Michael's apartment in Lincoln Park. The normalcy of the scene was unsettling. Margaret Atwood's latest novel lay open on the nightstand, a bookmark inserted at page 84. Rodriguez noticed the wedding dress hanging in the closet, awaiting final alterations. "When's the wedding date?" she asked softly. "December 12th, Michael replied, his voice catching. He turned away, unable to look at the dress any longer. In Samantha's home office, Michael showed the detectives her meticulous case notes, including a list of potential witnesses from Westlake. She was building an airtight case, he explained. These families trusted her to get justice for their children. The following day, Morelli visited United Chemicals headquarters, a gleaming steel and glass structure in downtown Chicago. Security guards and corporate attorneys met him in the lobby, severely limiting his access to employees. Thomas Granger received the detective in a sterile conference room rather than his office. His composure was perfect, his suit immaculate. "Naturally, we're concerned about Ms. Richardson's whereabouts," Granger stated with practiced sincerity. "United Chemical is even offering a $100,000 reward for information. We want this situation resolved as quickly as possible." By the end of the third day, the FBI had officially joined the investigation. Special Agent Robert Garcia, 42, with salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes, took command of the operation with quiet authority. "We're treating this as possible obstruction of federal justice," Garcia explained to Morelli and Michael during their first meeting. Her case had serious implications for United Chemical and potentially for government regulatory bodies. That afternoon, Michael stormed into Goldstein's office, demanding access to Samantha's United Chemical files. "She disappeared because of this case," he shouted, his composure finally breaking. "I need to see what she was working on." Goldstein's response was measured but firm. "These are privileged documents, Michael. We can't risk compromising the case. Samantha wouldn't want that." As Michael left the building, Jenny caught up with him by the elevators, discreetly pressing a thin notebook into his hands. "Sam kept this separate from the official files," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. She called it her insurance policy. "I've made a copy. The original is still in her desk." Back in his study that night, Michael pored over Samantha's personal notes. Her handwriting, usually so precise, appeared hurried in places. Several pages contained what looked like code, names replaced with animal designations, numbers and dates arranged in patterns only she would understand. On page 17, Michael found a list of coded names. Next to Falcon, possibly Judge Wells, he reasoned, a disturbing notation: offshore accounts, Cayman Islands, initial contact made by G. His heart raced as the implications became clear. Samantha had uncovered evidence of judicial bribery, possibly orchestrated by Granger or someone else from United Chemical, whose name started with G. The sudden sound of metal scraping against metal froze Michael in place. Looking up from the notebook, he realized someone was trying to force his front door lock. The metallic scraping at the door sent a surge of adrenaline through Michael's body. He lunged for the kitchen, grabbing a chef's knife before positioning himself behind the door. The lock mechanism jiggled violently as two men in black clothing worked on the deadbolt. When the apartment's alarm system suddenly blared to life, the intruders immediately abandoned their attempt and fled down the hallway. Minutes later, uniformed officers photographed the scratched lock and door frame, while Michael frantically tried to explain the significance of Samantha's notebook. "They came for this, not for me," Michael insisted, clutching the notebook to his chest. This proves Samantha uncovered judicial corruption. Detective Morelli examined the coded pages with undisguised skepticism. "Codes and initials? We need concrete evidence, not conspiracy theories, Mr. Bennett. This could be anything." Despite his doubts, Morelli arranged for a patrol car to keep watch on Michael's apartment overnight. Just as a precaution, he emphasized, clearly unconvinced of any connection to Samantha's disappearance. The following morning, Michael met Jenny at a coffee shop 6 blocks from Goldstein and Partners. They chose a corner table far from other patrons, speaking in hushed tones as they worked through Samantha's coding system. "She used birthdays and anniversaries as numerical substitutions," Jenny explained, pointing to a sequence of numbers. "This date here, it's when she won her first major case." Michael nodded, recognizing Samantha's methodical mind at work. "And the animal names, she used these in law school for mnemonic devices." Together they deciphered a particularly damning passage. Falcon received 2 transfers, confirmed by contact at First Cayman Bank. G personally authorized. The implications were unmistakable. Judge Wells had accepted bribes, likely from Grayson, the CEO of United Chemical. Meanwhile, at the FBI's Chicago field office, Special Agent Garcia established an operations room dedicated to the Richardson case. Photos of Samantha, Judge Wells, and United Chemical executives covered one wall, with timelines and known movements displayed on another. "The judge's sudden recusal is highly suspicious," Garcia told his team. "I want his financial records, phone logs, everything we can legally obtain." By late afternoon, 2 FBI agents arrived at Judge Wells' lakefront home. His wife, a thin woman with nervous hands, informed them that her husband had left abruptly the previous day. "Harrison had to travel urgently yesterday," she explained, eyes darting between the agents. "Heart problems. His doctor recommended a specialist." Back at headquarters, an analyst pulled up immigration records showing Judge Harrison Wells passing through Cayman Islands customs less than 18 hours after Samantha's disappearance. "This is no coincidence," Garcia said, studying the timestamp. "He's running." The same afternoon, United Chemical held a press conference in their gleaming corporate headquarters. CEO Richard Grayson, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, expressed profound concern for Samantha's welfare, while subtly undermining her stability. "Ms. Richardson was under tremendous pressure with this case," Grayson told reporters. "We've all seen dedicated professionals sometimes become overwhelmed by their responsibilities. We sincerely hope she's simply taking time to recover her equilibrium." Watching the broadcast from his apartment, Michael hurled a coffee mug at the television. "Bastards," he growled. "They're setting up a narrative that she cracked under pressure." The next morning, Michael stormed into Robert Goldstein's office, ignoring the senior partner's assistant's protests. "You're more concerned about the case than about her," Michael shouted, slamming his palms on Goldstein's mahogany desk. "What are you hiding? Why aren't you demanding answers from United Chemical?" Goldstein remained composed. "Michael, I understand you're upset, but making unfounded accusations isn't helping Samantha. We're cooperating fully with authorities." That evening, Michael visited Elaine in her hospital room. Despite her weakened state, she insisted on helping, pulling out a photo album from her bedside drawer. "Look at these," she said, showing Michael photos of Samantha's law school graduation. She always had systems for everything. Even back then, she created codes for her study notes. Michael studied the images of a younger Samantha, her face beaming with pride in her graduation gown. "If she encoded something, she had a system," Elaine continued, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Something consistent she'd remember." This insight led Michael to examine Samantha's bookshelf at home, where he discovered an old legal codebook she'd used in law school. Inside the front cover, she'd written a simple substitution key, the pattern that unlocked her personal notation system. Outside United Chemicals headquarters, families from Westlake gathered in a solemn vigil. They held photographs of Samantha alongside pictures of their sick children. Mary Connors, whose 7-year-old son had died of leukemia, spoke to local news cameras. "Samantha Richardson was fighting for our children when no one else would," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Now she's missing, and we demand answers." 5 days after Samantha's disappearance, Michael participated in a press conference organized by the FBI. The lack of sleep had taken its toll. His eyes were sunken, his clothes rumpled, his hands trembling slightly as he appealed directly to the camera. "Someone knows what happened to Samantha," he said. "Please, if you have any information, come forward." When a reporter from the Chicago Tribune asked whether Michael had considered that Samantha might have left voluntarily due to case pressure, something snapped inside him. "She would never abandon these families," he shouted, lunging toward the reporter before Agent Garcia restrained him. "She was threatened. She was onto something big." Hours later, sedated in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Michael drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the haze of medication, he heard urgent voices in the corridor outside his room. "Judge Wells was found dead in his Cayman Islands hotel room this morning," a voice whispered. "Officially a heart attack, but Garcia thinks it was poisoning and wants the body exhumed immediately once it returns to the United States." The whispered words about Judge Wells sent a jolt through Michael's sedated mind. He struggled to full consciousness, fighting against the medication as the conversation continued outside his door. "We need to keep this quiet until we confirm," a voice Michael recognized as Agent Garcia's replied. "If it is poison, this case just became much bigger than a disappearance." The following morning, national news broadcasts showed footage of Judge Wells's flag-draped coffin being unloaded from a private jet at O'Hare International Airport. The reporter's carefully neutral tone did little to mask the sensational undertones. Judge Harrison Wells, 64, died unexpectedly while on what his family described as a medical trip to the Cayman Islands. Sources close to the investigation have raised questions about the timing, coming just days after the disappearance of prominent attorney Samantha Richardson. Agent Garcia stood at the foot of Michael's hospital bed, his expression grave. "We've obtained a court order for autopsy, despite the family's objections," he said without preamble. "Judge Wells's death transforms the entire investigation." Michael pushed himself upright. He ran because Samantha had evidence against him, then they silenced him too. 3 days later, the FBI laboratory in Quantico confirmed what Garcia had suspected. Dr. Lauren Kang, the Bureau's senior toxicologist, reported her findings via secure video conference. "Thiosemicarbazide," she stated, pointing to highlighted sections of her analysis. "A rare poison that mimics cardiac arrest. It's not coincidental. This was a deliberate elimination." With Wells' death officially ruled a homicide, the FBI designated the Richardson case as a potential multiple homicide and obstruction of justice. Agent Garcia now commanded a task force of 12 agents with direct reporting lines to Washington. Meanwhile, Michael, released from the hospital and now working closely with Jenny, spread Samantha's coded notes across a table at an obscure coffee shop in Wicker Park, far from prying eyes. "Look at this pattern," Jenny whispered, pointing to a sequence of numbers. "She's documented at least 7 payments to Wells through offshore accounts." Michael nodded, deciphering another section. Congressman Burnham and Morris pressured the EPA to suppress reports. Payments through campaign donations via Green Lake Foundation, a shell charity controlled by United Chemical. The web of corruption Samantha had uncovered was staggering. A coordinated effort involving judges, elected officials, and corporate executives, all working to conceal the devastating health effects of chemical contamination. That afternoon, Michael accompanied Agent Garcia to Goldstein and Partners, to access Samantha's office computer. What they found, or rather didn't find, was alarming. "These folders are empty," Garcia noted, clicking through the digital case files. "And according to the system logs, most of her emails from the past month have been deleted." The firm's IT specialist, summoned by Garcia's badge, examined the server logs with growing concern. "Someone systematically erased files between 6 and 11 p.m. on the night she disappeared," he confirmed. "They knew exactly what they were looking for." In a glass-walled conference room down the hall, Garcia confronted Thomas Granger, whose composed exterior had begun to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. "I'm merely outside counsel for the company," Granger insisted, voice higher than normal. "I have no knowledge of any illegal activities." "Yet you were the last person to see Samantha Richardson in court," Garcia countered, "and phone records show you called Richard Grayson 4 times in the hour after she disappeared." Back at police headquarters, Detective Morelli meticulously reviewed security footage from the courthouse, noticing something they'd missed in earlier viewings: Raymond Cooper, the security guard, speaking urgently into his cell phone immediately after Samantha entered the parking garage. "We need to talk to Cooper again," Morelli told Garcia. "His reaction time is suspicious." When agents arrived at Cooper's modest bungalow on Chicago's South Side the next morning, they found an empty house with clear signs of hasty departure, drawers left open, food rotting in the refrigerator. "Left with suitcases middle of the night," an elderly neighbor volunteered. "Said he'd won some lottery. Always thought Ray was a straight-up guy." The disappearance of the courthouse security guard added another damning piece to the puzzle. Cooper's bank records, obtained via subpoena, showed a $50,000 deposit 2 days after Samantha vanished. The following afternoon, Michael drove to Westlake, a working-class neighborhood dominated by factories and warehouses. Children played in yards not far from a visibly contaminated creek that ran behind a row of modest homes, its water unnaturally blue-green. Mary Connors greeted him at her door, grief etched permanently in the lines around her eyes. Without speaking, she led Michael to her bedroom, knelt beside the bed, and pried up a loose floorboard. "Samantha left this with me 3 days before she disappeared," Mary explained, withdrawing a waterproof document case. "Called it her life insurance. Said if anything happened to her, I should wait 1 week, then get it to you or the FBI." With trembling hands, Michael opened the case. Inside lay a treasure trove: internal United Chemical memos from 1989 acknowledging toxic contamination, signed by Richard Grayson, then operations director. Email printouts showing discussions about relocating waste disposal to Westlake, specifically because its low-income population lacked political capital to effectively oppose operations. "My God," Michael whispered, "this is everything she needed to win the case." Agent Garcia, examining the documents in his office an hour later, immediately reached for his phone. "I need warrants for Green Lake Foundation's accounts and authorization to question Congressman Burnham and Morris immediately," he ordered, "and put surveillance on all United Chemical executives. None of them leaves town." That evening, alone in Samantha's apartment, Michael discovered a hidden compartment behind a row of law books, a small waterproof case containing a USB drive. The moment he inserted it into his laptop, the screen illuminated with a folder labeled "Life Insurance, if something happens to me." As Michael clicked to open it, the apartment suddenly went dark. Through the blackened window, he glimpsed 2 men with flashlights moving swiftly across the garden toward the building. Michael's instincts took over instantly. Pocketing the USB drive, he moved silently through the darkened apartment, away from the windows. The men outside were methodically approaching the building's entrance. He slipped out the back fire escape, wincing at each metallic creak beneath his weight. Rain had begun to fall, a fine mist that dampened his clothes as he darted between shadows. "He's inside. Check every room," a gruff voice commanded from below as Michael descended the final ladder and dropped into the alley. Heart racing, he ran through the maze of side streets, constantly checking over his shoulder for pursuit. After several blocks, He flagged down a passing taxi, directing it to a location several miles from his actual destination as a precaution. "Drop me at North and Damen," he instructed, still catching his breath. 20 minutes later, after ensuring he wasn't followed, Michael walked the remaining 8 blocks to Carol Hines' modest bungalow in Humboldt Park. Carol opened the door, her concerned expression deepening at Michael's drenched appearance. "My God, what happened to you?" "They came for me," Michael explained, stepping inside. "They know I have something." Carol's living room stood in stark contrast to the sleek corporate environments Michael had grown accustomed to. Bulletin boards covered the walls, plastered with missing persons flyers, case notes, and newspaper clippings, the command center for her volunteer work with families of the disappeared. "You can stay here tonight," she offered. "No one associates you with me." Michael produced the USB drive with trembling fingers. "Samantha left this hidden in the apartment. We need to see what's on it before they find us." Carol led him to a corner desk where an aging laptop sat. "It's not fancy, but it works," she said, powering on the machine. The drive contained dozens of meticulously organized folders, financial records, corporate communications, and most damning of all, audio recordings labeled with dates and participants' initials. Michael clicked on one marked RGHW 91298, and the laptop speakers crackled with Richard Grayson's unmistakable voice. "We need to neutralize the Richardson problem," Grayson could be heard saying. "She's getting too close to the disposal records." An older voice, presumably Judge Wells, replied, "The hearing's scheduled for October. I can control what evidence gets admitted, but if she already has copies of those memos..." Michael and Carol exchanged shocked glances. "She recorded them," Carol whispered. "No wonder they wanted her gone." "We need to copy this immediately," Michael said, forwarding the files to multiple email addresses, including Garcia's, while Carol anxiously peered through the window blinds. At dawn the following day, teams of FBI agents in tactical gear simultaneously raided United Chemicals headquarters and the homes of 6 senior executives. Live news coverage showed employees watching in stunned silence as agents carried out boxes of documents and computer equipment. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has executed search warrants at multiple locations connected to United Chemical Corporation, a bureau spokesperson confirmed on camera. This is part of an ongoing investigation into potential obstruction of justice related to the Westlake contamination lawsuit. Across town, Congressman Kevin Burnham hastily arranged a press conference on the steps of his district office. "These allegations are completely fabricated," he declared, perspiration visible despite the cool weather. "I am cooperating fully with authorities and expect to be completely exonerated." That afternoon, Michael discovered a crucial detail in Samantha's coded notes: the name and contact information for Frank Donovan, a private investigator she had apparently hired weeks before her disappearance. She suspected she was being followed, Michael told Agent Garcia, as they drove to meet Donovan at a rundown bar on Chicago's western outskirts. "Hired someone to watch the watchers." Frank Donovan looked nothing like the confident ex-cop his resume suggested. At 65, he had the haggard appearance of someone who hadn't slept properly in days, his hands visibly trembling around his untouched whiskey glass. "I already told that lawyer too much," Donovan said when Garcia identified himself. "Nearly got killed for it. Not going through that again." Garcia placed his badge on the table. "Mr. Donovan, obstructing a federal investigation is a serious offense. Whatever you're afraid of, I promise you, the FBI is more problematic." Donovan's eyes darted nervously around the bar before he finally relented, reaching inside his weathered leather jacket to produce a manila envelope. "Last job I ever take involving corporations," he muttered. The envelope contained surveillance photographs showing Richard Grayson, Judge Wells, and security guard Raymond Cooper meeting at a secluded lakefront property. The timestamp indicated the meeting occurred just 1 week before Samantha's disappearance. "She hired me to track Grayson," Donovan explained. "Said she needed leverage. When I showed her these pictures, she got real quiet." Next day, she gave me a bonus and said my services were no longer required. Back at FBI headquarters, Garcia ran the property through databases, discovering it belonged to a shell company traceable to United Chemical. They were planning this, he concluded grimly. That evening, Michael was shocked to see his own face on the evening news, as an unnamed source close to the investigation questioned his mental stability and suggested he was creating conspiracy theories to cope with abandonment. "They're trying to discredit you," Carol observed. "Means you're getting close to something they can't afford to have revealed." Minutes later, Michael's prepaid cell phone, purchased that morning for security, rang with an unknown number. When he answered, an electronically distorted voice delivered a chilling message: "Stop now, or end up like her." The line went dead immediately. 3 days later, after an intensive multi-state search, FBI agents finally located Raymond Cooper in Detroit, living under an assumed name in a sparsely furnished apartment. When they breached the door, agents discovered an obsessive collage covering an entire wall, surveillance photos of Samantha, maps with locations marked, and most disturbing of all, an enlarged photograph showing an unconscious Samantha being carried into a van. The timestamp in the corner indicated she had been alive for at least 2 days after her disappearance. The photograph of Samantha, unconscious and vulnerable, unleashed a wave of controlled fury throughout the FBI's Detroit field office. Within minutes of the discovery, a full tactical team surrounded Cooper's apartment building, sealing all exits. Cooper, spotting agents from his window, attempted to flee through a rear service door, only to be tackled and handcuffed by waiting agents. "Raymond Cooper, you're under arrest for kidnapping and conspiracy to obstruct justice," announced the lead agent, as Cooper's face pressed against the cold pavement. Back in Chicago, Michael stared through the one-way glass of the interrogation room, watching Cooper, now shackled to a metal table, fidget nervously under the harsh fluorescent lights. The room's stark gray walls seemed to close in on the security guard as Agent Garcia methodically arranged photographs across the table. "These were in your apartment, Mr. Cooper," Garcia said, his voice deceptively calm. "Care to explain why you have surveillance photos of a missing attorney?" Cooper maintained his innocence, claiming the photos had been planted. His defiance crumbled, however, when Garcia produced bank records showing a $50,000 deposit to an offshore account in Cooper's name 2 days after Samantha disappeared. "I just facilitated access to the parking garage," Cooper finally admitted, sweat beading on his forehead. "I didn't know that they'd make her. I didn't know." Michael pressed his palms against the glass, tears streaming silently down his face as Cooper described the abduction. "She recognized me immediately," Cooper confessed, his voice barely audible. "Said, 'Ray, what are you doing?' She tried to run. I had to use force." Cooper's testimony painted a horrifying picture. He had rendered Samantha unconscious with chloroform, loaded her into a waiting van, and delivered her to 2 men at an abandoned warehouse on Chicago's industrial South Side. He identified the men as private security contractors frequently employed by United Chemical for sensitive matters. "What happened to her after that?" Garcia demanded. "I don't know, I swear," Cooper insisted. "They paid me to disappear afterward. Said I'd be next if I ever talked." While Cooper's interrogation continued, FBI teams executed simultaneous raids on the homes of United Chemical executives. Richard Grayson, awakened at 5:30 in the morning, was escorted from his North Shore mansion in a bathrobe as neighbors watched from behind curtained windows. Thomas Granger and 4 other company officers received similar treatment. In the FBI's Chicago Operations Center, a digital map displayed the expanding investigation, red lines connecting people, locations, and timeline events, with Samantha's photograph at the center. Technicians processed phone records, financial transactions, and surveillance footage, building the case piece by methodical piece. Forensic teams descended on the abandoned warehouse identified by Cooper. Despite the 5-year interval, modern technology allowed them to detect microscopic blood traces on a support column, blood that preliminary testing suggested was consistent with Samantha's type. That evening, Michael visited Elaine Richardson at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Her condition had deteriorated significantly, the cancer advancing despite treatment. The monitors tracking her vitals showed weakening patterns as Michael gently held her frail hand. "We need to let her rest, Michael," Elaine whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment's persistent beeping. "I can't live in this limbo anymore. I need a place to mourn my daughter." Michael's response was immediate and firm. "There won't be a funeral without a body. I'm not giving up on her." Later that night, a federal judge signed multiple search warrants in his chambers, the gravity of the case evident in his solemn expression. "Given the severity of the evidence presented," he stated while signing the last document, "I authorize searches of all properties listed in the affidavit." At dawn, FBI helicopters circled above the isolated lakefront property from Donovan's photographs. Ground teams converged through the wooded terrain as morning light revealed an apparently abandoned house with boarded windows and overgrown landscaping. Meanwhile, Michael and Garcia examined financial records showing substantial payments from United Chemical to a private clinic specializing in discreet care for wealthy clients who required medical attention without traditional documentation. "This could be where they took her after the warehouse," Garcia suggested, adding the facility to their investigation map. Across town, Thomas Granger sat in a separate interrogation room, maintaining his composure better than Cooper had, though the strain showed in the tightness around his eyes. "I'm merely the attorney," he insisted repeatedly. "I don't make operational decisions for the company." His practiced confidence faltered visibly when Garcia placed a photograph on the table showing Granger leaving the isolated lakefront property 1 week after Samantha's disappearance. "Want to revise your statement, counselor?" Garcia asked quietly. By mid-afternoon, the FBI's search of the lakefront property had yielded disturbing results. In the basement, agents discovered a locked room with padded walls and abandoned medical equipment. A technician called Garcia over, pointing to marks scratched into the wall, marks that, upon closer inspection, formed the initials SR, alongside a date 3 months after Samantha's official disappearance. "She was alive," Michael whispered, tracing the marks with trembling fingers. "She was here, fighting until the end." The discovery transformed the investigation entirely. No longer was this merely about a disappearance. Samantha Richardson had been held captive, against her will, for months. The forensics team carefully collected hair samples from a crack in the wall, blood residue from the hospital-style bed, and traces of medications from discarded vials. Garcia placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. "We'll find out what happened to her. I promise you that." As the sun set over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across the crime scene, a forensic technician made another discovery in the padded room. Carved into the underside of the metal bed frame, almost invisibly small, were additional markings, the initials SR, and a date, 3 months after her disappearance, proving she had been alive and kept in captivity much longer than anyone had imagined. The carved initials sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Forensic technicians worked with painstaking precision, documenting every inch of the padded room that had served as Samantha's prison. Under specialized ultraviolet lighting, the room revealed its grim secrets: biological stains on the hospital mattress, scratch marks on the padded walls, and evidence of restraints that had been hastily removed. "The degradation pattern of these hair samples suggests long-term occupancy," explained the lead forensic technician, carefully collecting strands caught in a wall fissure. "We'll compare them to Ms. Richardson's DNA profile immediately." Michael stood motionless in the center of the room, trying to process the horror of what had happened there. His mind filled with images of Samantha, fighting against her captors, maintaining her will despite impossible circumstances. The scratched initials spoke volumes about her determination. Even in captivity, she had found a way to leave evidence of her presence. "She was here, fighting until the end," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. "My Samantha never gave up." Within hours, Preliminary DNA analysis confirmed what they already suspected. The hair samples matched Samantha's genetic profile. Blood residue on the mattress and floor also provided a match. More disturbing still was the collection of medication vials recovered from a locked cabinet, powerful sedatives and antipsychotics typically used to manage uncooperative patients. Agent Garcia immediately redirected the investigation toward identifying the medical professional who had administered these drugs. The serial numbers on the empty vials led them to a medical supply company that confirmed the purchase by Dr. Gerald Hoffman, a 72-year-old retired physician with indirect connections to United Chemical through philanthropic circles. The following morning, FBI agents located Dr. Hoffman at the Lakeside Country Club, where he was preparing for his regular Thursday golf game. His face drained of color when he saw the agents approaching across the manicured green, badges displayed. "Dr. Gerald Hoffman?" Garcia called. "We need to speak with you regarding your involvement with United Chemical and a patient you treated at a private residence in Winnetka." Hoffman's initial interrogation presented a man trying to maintain professional distance. In the stark fluorescent lighting of the FBI interview room, he projected calm authority. "I was called to provide palliative care for a terminal patient who desired privacy. I never asked her name. Discretion is fundamental in my practice." This facade crumbled rapidly when confronted with photographic evidence of his multiple visits to the lakefront property and the medications recovered from the scene. Garcia silently placed photographs of the padded room on the table, followed by images of Samantha from before her disappearance. "When I arrived, she was severely malnourished, with signs of prolonged sedation," Hoffman finally admitted, his professional demeanor collapsing. "They told me it was part of her oncological treatment protocol. Said she was a wealthy executive who wanted to spend her final days away from public attention." As Hoffman's testimony continued, a horrifying narrative emerged. According to the doctor, Samantha had been kept sedated initially, but as supplies ran low between his visits, she would regain lucidity. During these periods, she refused to cooperate with her captor's demands, presumably to sign documents or reveal the location of evidence she had hidden. "She developed pneumonia in the winter months," Hoffman continued, avoiding eye contact. "I requested immediate transfer to a hospital facility, but Grayson refused, said the situation was too delicate for conventional medical channels. She passed away approximately 2 weeks later." While Garcia continued pressing Hoffman for exact dates and details, Michael slipped away, finding solace in the small chapel within the FBI building. Alone in the quiet space, he stared at the engagement ring he'd carried in his pocket since Samantha's disappearance, a constant reminder of the future they'd planned together. The FBI's Financial Investigation Unit worked through the night, uncovering a $30,000 payment from United Chemical to Discreet Memorial Services, a cremation facility in Duluth, Minnesota. The transaction occurred in February 1999, approximately 4 months after Samantha's initial disappearance. When agents interviewed the crematorium's owner, he confirmed receiving an unusual request. "We got specific instructions. No documentation, no questions. Just an envelope of cash. Happens sometimes with wealthy families wanting to avoid publicity." Richard Grayson, now in prison-issued clothing, sat with his defense attorney and federal prosecutors in a conference room at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The chemical company CEO's arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the desperate calculation of a man facing life imprisonment. "It was never supposed to be murder," Grayson admitted, his voice low and defeated. "We just wanted the documents, make her sign confidentiality agreements. But she never cooperated, not even when we explained what was at stake." Back at FBI headquarters, Michael and Garcia analyzed maps of the Duluth area, focusing on Lake Superior locations where human remains might have been disposed of. If they cremated her, they would have wanted the ashes somewhere impossible to recover, Garcia reasoned, circling several deep water areas. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Elaine watched television news coverage of the case developments from her bed, silent tears tracking down her hollow cheeks as reporters described how her daughter had been held prisoner for defending sick children. 2 days later, FBI dive teams searched the frigid waters of Lake Superior. The specialized unit worked methodically through the search grid, hampered by poor visibility and underwater currents. On the afternoon of the second day, a diver's signal buoy appeared on the surface. When the divers surfaced, they carried a sealed metal urn. Opening it carefully in the presence of Michael and the forensic team, they confirmed it contained human cremated remains. But as the contents were carefully examined, a technician noticed something unexpected. A small metallic object nestled among the ashes. After gentle cleaning, they identified a water-damaged USB drive, its metal casing corroded but potentially recoverable. The metallic glint of the USB drive amid the ashes electrified the investigation team. While Michael stared at the small device, simultaneously hopeful and horrified by its implications, Agent Garcia was already on the phone, requesting the Bureau's top digital forensics experts. "She knew," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Even at the end, she was thinking 10 steps ahead of them. The USB drive was immediately transported to the FBI's specialized digital evidence laboratory in Quantico, where technicians worked in a sterile environment to assess the water damage. Chief Technician Sofia Alvarez, renowned for recovering data from seemingly destroyed devices, personally supervised the delicate operation. "Water damage has affected the connector ports and circuit board," she explained to Garcia via secure video conference. "But the memory chip itself appears intact. We can potentially recover data by directly accessing the NAND flash memory." While the digital team worked tirelessly, the legal machinery moved forward with unprecedented speed. At a packed press conference, U.S. Attorney Jonathan Martinez stood before a forest of microphones, his expression appropriately grave for the historic moment. Today, the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois announces formal charges against Richard Grayson and 4 other executives of United Chemical Corporation, Martinez declared. These charges include kidnapping resulting in death, a federal crime punishable by life imprisonment or the death penalty. The weight of finality crushed against Michael's chest as he watched the press conference from a side room. Carol Hines stood beside him, her steady presence a silent comfort. Jenny Kaplan, who had risked her career to help uncover the truth, completed their small group of mourners. Though surrounded by people who cared, Michael had never felt more alone. Later that afternoon, Michael walked alone through Lincoln Park, finding the bench where he and Samantha had often spent Sunday mornings discussing their future. For 5 years, he had existed in a state of desperate hope and relentless action. Now, faced with the certainty of her death, he finally allowed himself to fully experience the grief he had held at bay. "You maintained a superhuman strength for 5 years," Carol told him during their grief counseling session the following day. "Now it's time to honor her by allowing yourself to feel this loss." The session marked Michael's first step toward processing a trauma that had defined half a decade of his life. He spoke about his guilt for not protecting her, his anger at the system that failed her, and the emptiness that now stretched before him. At the U.S. Attorney's Office, Martinez led a strategy meeting with his prosecution team. The wall displayed photographs of the accused, Grayson, Granger, Cooper, and 2 security contractors identified through Cooper's testimony. "With Cooper and Hoffman cooperating, Grayson has nowhere to hide," Martinez observed, studying the timeline of events. "His only play is to try for a plea deal, but I'm not inclined to offer one." That evening, the families of Westlake gathered for a candlelight vigil in memory of Samantha. The soft glow illuminated photographs of both Samantha and the children affected by the contamination. Mary Connors, who had lost her son to leukemia, addressed the gathered crowd. "Samantha Richardson gave her life fighting for our children," Mary said, her voice steady despite her tears. "We will not allow her sacrifice to be forgotten or to be in vain." 3 days after recovering the USB drive, Agent Garcia received an urgent call from the digital lab. "We've got it," the technician announced breathlessly. "The recovery succeeded beyond expectations. There are dozens of files and a video. She recorded a message. Within the hour, the FBI's main conference room filled with investigators, prosecutors, and Michael. All eyes focused on the large monitor as the technician prepared to play the recovered video file. "This is dated October 10th, 1998, the technician noted, 2 days before her disappearance. The screen flickered, and suddenly Samantha appeared, wearing her signature dark green suit, sitting at what appeared to be her home desk. The sight of her, alive, determined, her eyes clear and focused, drew an audible gasp from everyone in the room. Michael unconsciously reached toward the screen, as if he could somehow touch her across the years. "If you're watching this, I'm probably dead or missing," Samantha began, her voice steady and professional despite the chilling words. "I've discovered evidence that United Chemical deliberately contaminated the groundwater in Westlake and has been bribing officials to cover it up for nearly a decade." Over the next 15 minutes, Samantha methodically presented document after document, explaining the conspiracy in precise legal terms. She showed internal memos dated 1989, acknowledging the carcinogenic properties of their chemical byproducts, alongside projections of the acceptable casualty rate in surrounding communities. United Chemical knew since 1989 that their chemicals caused leukemia, she explained, holding up a document signed by Grayson himself. They prioritized profits over human lives, specifically targeting Westlake because its residents lacked political power. Near the end of the recording, Samantha's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Michael," she said, looking directly into the camera, "I know you would never give up searching for me. I want you to know that every moment with you was a gift." Her final words were directed at the authorities she knew would eventually see the recording. "Don't let my death be in vain. These children deserve justice." As the video ended, the room remained silent, the power of Samantha's testimony hanging in the air. Garcia was the first to move, immediately organizing teams for additional arrests based on the new evidence, including government officials not previously implicated. That night, in his small apartment, Michael carefully placed Samantha's photograph beside the urn containing her remains. He lit a single candle and, for the first time in 5 years, allowed himself to say goodbye. On the morning of the first day of Richard Grayson's trial, the prosecution team received an anonymous envelope containing a security access card for a bank deposit box in Chicago. Inside the vault, they discovered a complete set of original United Chemical documents and audio recordings that Samantha had hidden days before her kidnapping, with a handwritten note: "Plan B. Use this to bury them if something happens to me. S.R." The security access card led Martinez and his team to the Northern Trust Bank in downtown Chicago, where a safety deposit box registered under the name Sarah Richardson, Samantha's rarely used first name, yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Inside the climate-controlled box, they discovered meticulously organized folders containing original United Chemical documents, complete with signatures and corporate seals, alongside microcassettes containing recorded conversations between executives, government officials, and Judge Wells. "She created a perfect dead man's switch," Martinez remarked as he carefully examined the handwritten note. Samantha Richardson was always 10 steps ahead of them. The discovery rendered United Chemical's defense strategy effectively obsolete. The documents provided irrefutable proof of corporate malfeasance dating back to 1989, establishing a clear timeline of deliberate contamination and subsequent cover-up. Internal memos detailed explicit decisions to continue dumping carcinogenic chemicals, despite scientific evidence of their deadly effects on nearby communities. Chicago's federal courthouse became the epicenter of national attention as Richard Grayson's trial began. Security measures unprecedented since the days of mob prosecutions surrounded the proceedings. Metal detectors, bomb-sniffing dogs, and U.S. Marshals posted at every entrance. Michael arrived early each morning, claiming the same seat in the first row directly behind the prosecution table. The United States will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendants engaged in a criminal conspiracy resulting in the death of Samantha Richardson, Martinez stated during his opening argument. This case is not merely about one woman's murder. It represents what happens when corporations believe themselves to be above the law and human life becomes simply a cost of doing business. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over the following weeks. On the third day, Martinez presented the court with a comprehensive timeline displayed on a large screen. Photographs of hospitalized Westlake children positioned alongside internal United Chemical memos acknowledging the toxicity of their waste products. Raymond Cooper took the stand on the trial's fifth day, head bowed in shame as he recounted his role in Samantha's abduction. Michael stared unblinkingly at the former security guard, memorizing every detail of the man who had set Samantha's death in motion. Cooper avoided Michael's gaze throughout his testimony. "She recognized me right away," Cooper testified, his voice barely audible. "Asked what I was doing. When she tried to run, I grabbed her from behind and covered her face with the cloth they gave me." Dr. Hoffman's testimony the following week proved even more damning. The physician described Samantha's deteriorating condition in clinical detail, explaining how she had been kept sedated but would become lucid when medication schedules were disrupted. Despite her weakened state, she refused to provide information about hidden documents or sign any papers they presented, Hoffman stated. "I've rarely witnessed such resolve in my 40 years of medical practice." Grayson's defense team, led by high-profile attorney Lawrence Davidson, attempted to undermine the evidence at every turn. "These recordings could easily have been manipulated," Davidson argued during cross-examination of the FBI's audio expert. "Ms. Richardson had every motivation to fabricate evidence against my client." The prosecution countered with testimony from the Bureau's digital forensics team. "Our analysis confirms these files are original, unmodified records with authentic timestamps from 1989 through 1997, explained the lead technician. "The digital signatures and decay patterns could not be artificially created." While the trial dominated headlines, Michael began redirecting his life's purpose. On a crisp autumn morning, he stood on the campus of Northwestern Law School, Samantha's alma mater, clutching admission application forms. The Gothic buildings where she had once studied now represented his own path forward. "She always said I'd make a good lawyer," Michael explained to Carol Hines, who had accompanied him for moral support. "I thought she was just being kind. Now I understand she saw something in me I couldn't see myself." In Westlake, the community that had first trusted Samantha with their children's stories organized to ensure her work would continue. Mary Connors, emerging as the neighborhood's unofficial leader, presided over community meetings in the local church basement, unfurling maps showing areas still requiring remediation. "United Chemical thinks this ends with the trial," Mary told the assembled families. "But our fight is just beginning. Samantha died demanding complete cleanup and fair compensation. We won't settle for anything less." Meanwhile, FBI agents executed search warrants at the offices of Goldstein and Partners, seizing servers and digital records as Partners watched nervously from the sidelines. Internal emails revealed the firm had known about threats against Samantha before her disappearance, but had prioritized the case's billable hours over her safety. On a somber Saturday morning, Michael visited Elaine Richardson's grave in Evanston Cemetery. He placed fresh flowers beside the headstone and knelt on the damp grass. "We're almost there," he whispered. "Samantha will have justice, I promise." After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The chamber fell silent as the foreman handed the verdict form to the judge. Michael held his breath. 5 years of anguish crystallized in this single moment. "In the case of United States versus Richard Grayson," the judge announced, "on all counts, the jury finds the defendant guilty." As the courtroom erupted in controlled chaos, journalists rushing for the exits, prosecutors shaking hands, Grayson slumping in defeat, Michael sat motionless, accepting handshakes and backpats with numb detachment. Outside the courthouse, As reporters swarmed for statements, an elderly man approached Michael, introducing himself as a retired United Chemical executive. "There's one more property they never found on Lake Michigan in Winnetka," the man whispered urgently. "Your fiancée hid something there before she was captured, something even Grayson doesn't know about, and I believe it's still there after all these years." The elderly man's words echoed in Michael's mind as he quickly pulled Agent Garcia aside, away from the courthouse steps teeming with reporters. "We need to check a property in Winnetka," Michael explained urgently. "A lakefront house that might contain more evidence Samantha hid." The following morning, Michael and Garcia sat in an unmarked sedan half a block from the address provided by the retired executive. The elegant shoreline property, surrounded by old-growth trees and a discreet security fence, appeared unoccupied. "House is registered to Lakeside Holdings, LLC," Garcia reported, phone pressed to his ear. "We're working on the warrant now, but corporate shells within shells make it complicated." While legal channels proceeded at their bureaucratic pace, justice moved forward elsewhere. Richard Grayson received a 35-year federal prison sentence without possibility of parole. Judge Caroline Weston, presiding over the case, delivered a scathing assessment before announcing the punishment. "Mr. Grayson, your crimes represent not merely homicide, but an attack on the very foundation of our justice system," she declared, her voice unwavering. "This court cannot overlook the calculated nature with which you silenced someone seeking truth and justice for suffering children." As marshals led Grayson away in handcuffs, his eyes briefly met Michael's across the courtroom. In that momentary connection, Michael saw something unexpected, not defiance or hatred, but the hollow recognition of a man finally confronting the magnitude of his actions. In Westlake, healing began with symbolic gestures. One crisp autumn morning, Mary Connors and dozens of families gathered in the neighborhood's Central Park to unveil a memorial. The simple stone marker honored both the children lost to leukemia and Samantha Richardson, whose sacrifice had finally forced accountability. Behind them, environmental remediation equipment hummed steadily, beginning the long process of detoxifying decades of contamination. "Today marks a beginning, not an end," Mary told the assembled crowd. United Chemicals' $750 million settlement will fund complete cleanup and medical monitoring for generations to come. In his modest apartment, Michael transformed his living space into a shrine of purpose. Law textbooks now replaced the investigation materials that had dominated his walls for years. Each evening after classes at Northwestern, he studied until exhaustion, driven by a promise made silently at Samantha's grave. 4 years after the discovery of Samantha's remains, Michael Bennett graduated from Northwestern Law School. The ceremony held particular significance, taking place in the same auditorium where Samantha had received her degree a decade earlier. During the proceedings, Michael left a single rose and her photograph on an empty chair beside him. 2 months later, he and Gregory Feldman founded the Samantha Richardson Project in a small storefront office in downtown Chicago. The organization's mission was simple yet profound, providing free legal representation to victims of corporate environmental crimes and protection for attorneys facing retaliation for challenging powerful interests. At the project's modest opening ceremony, Michael unveiled a portrait of Samantha in her characteristic dark green suit. Beneath the painting, a brass plaque bore the words she had often repeated: "Justice is not merely an outcome, it is a daily commitment to truth, no matter the cost." Then, on a bright summer day in July 2003, fate intervened through the innocent curiosity of 3 children: Tyler Johnson, 12, Emily Martinez, 11, and Jamal Washington, 13, cousins spending their summer together in Winnetka, played a treasure hunt game in the wooded areas bordering Lake Michigan. "Look at this," Tyler shouted, pointing to a metal corner emerging from the soil, recently exposed by spring rainfall erosion. Using broken branches as impromptu digging tools, the children unearthed a partially deteriorated black leather briefcase. Inside, they discovered an Illinois Bar Association badge bearing the name Samantha M. Richardson, a leather-bound notebook filled with coded symbols and numbers, and a sealed plastic envelope containing photographs. "My dad's a police officer," Jamal said, examining the badge with growing recognition. "We should take this to him right away." Officer Derek Washington of the Winnetka Police Department immediately recognized Samantha's name from Police Academy case studies on high-profile disappearances. Within hours, FBI agents swarmed the wooded area, and news of the discovery reached Michael Bennett. "Where exactly did you find this?" Agent Garcia asked the children as FBI technicians methodically combed the surrounding terrain. The discovery site was approximately 500 yards from the lakefront property registered to Lakeside Holdings, LLC, the very property the retired executive had mentioned. This final connection completed the circle that had begun 5 years earlier. The coded journal contained Samantha's distinctive shorthand system that Michael immediately recognized from their years together. "She developed this during law school," he explained to investigators. "It's a modified legal stenography with numerical substitutions based on dates significant to her." With Michael's assistance, FBI cryptographers worked tirelessly for 3 days to decode the contents. What emerged validated every suspicion and confirmed every worst fear about the depths of corruption Samantha had uncovered. In 2007, Michael Bennett passed the Illinois bar exam and officially established the Samantha Richardson Project as a nationally recognized legal advocacy organization. Under his direction, the project won landmark cases against corporate polluters and helped draft legislation protecting environmental whistleblowers. On the 20th anniversary of Samantha's disappearance, Michael Bennett, now a respected environmental attorney and legal ethics professor, walked alone along Lake Michigan's shore at sunset. He paused to observe a newly installed underwater statue created by divers from the Samantha Richardson Project, a female figure in formal attire holding the scales of justice, eternally vigilant in the silent waters. "We did it, Sam," he whispered to the calm waters. "They can never silence anyone the way they silenced you again."